All right, my chapter was chapter 7, which was the city of Vienna of 1900, which was characterized as dirty politics, brothels, impending feelings of disaster, that sort of thing. And they were correct on that because it only lasted until 1914. Um, what signified this growth was the creation of the Ringstrasse, which is German for Ring Street, which Franz Joseph decided to create once he decided to take down the protective walls around the city, which a lot of cities in Europe had at the time due to medieval warfare and, because of sieges, but they weren't really needed anymore. So the Ringstrasse was created, which opened up travel throughout the city to every area of the city for the poor, for the elite, and it really congregated everything together. But another reason for this chapter being so important was rules had been lifted against the Jewish community as far as residents within Vienna, and they were all of a sudden allowed to live there. And so the sprawl to Vienna became extreme due to people wanting to take economic advantage of living in a city. Um, this sparked a massive surge of creativity because all of a sudden you had different populations coming together. And one of the things the chapter talks often about is the coffee houses. And the coffee houses at the time are kind of like what the bars are now to us in America. And this is where a lot of ideas and information was shared, which sparked a lot of creative ideas. And because these were people from different backgrounds and different cultures, there was a lot of new ideas. And this was okay and accepted because the city was growing so much that anything traditional about it was being covered up and somewhat being lost because all these different traditions and cultures were taking over. Therefore, new ideas were taken more seriously than they had been before, which allowed what 80% of this book, I mean, not the book, but the chapter was about was Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud moved to Vienna when he was 5, and he was the one that came up with theories such as the unconscious and theories of sexuality and all of these things that were thought to be weird and still kind of are sometimes, but they were actually fostered in the cultures of Vienna due to just the massive amounts of different backgrounds now. And the author thinks that that actually has a lot to do with the influence in America nowadays through creativity and technology, economics, fashion, architecture, all those kinds of things, and the way in which we spawn our ideas for them are based upon an assimilation of diversity, which is what America is, which is very similar to what Vienna was back then. Another interesting fact about Vienna at the time was that Adolf Hitler lived there and tried to get some of his works published in the Vienna School of Arts, and he was rejected both times. And a lot of people think this is when the original feelings of anti-Semitism, first began, which changed, the world's entire history at the time. Psychoanalysis made its way over to America. Thanks to Sigmund Freud, and it was used often in early psychology and therapy. It's definitely not so much anymore, but it did have a big impact on Western culture, so to speak. Another interesting fact is Felix Salten was the author of Bambi and lived in Vienna at the time. But at the same time as writing Bambi, he was also writing a book called Josephine Mutzenbacher, Memoirs of a Viennese Prostitute. This goes to show you that the idea that creative ideas would spark other creative ideas and they were allowed to be undertaken at the same time without being looked down upon was very popular in Vienna at the time. I personally feel like the author chose to talk about Sigmund Freud a little bit too much and did not talk so much about how Vienna influenced other people or other Western influence, things that became influences on Western culture later on. He really definitely focused on Sigmund Freud and tied into how Vienna was able to foster these things. And that's my synthesis on Vienna.